I used to ask students, and about 60 or 70 in a class, and I'd ask them a few little things about Thanksgiving. And ask them, how many learned any of that in public school, or in school, period? There'd be one or two hands that go up, and every time they always went to private school or homeschool. None of the public school students knew the answer. Is there a pattern in that? So what does that tell us about what's going on in the public schools? Obviously, some schools are worse than others, and obviously there are good teachers who kind of override bad curriculum. But the trend is, I think they are intentionally dumbing down the population. I just heard this morning. One of the governors of a southern state, he's a Democrat, the legislature pushed a bill that would allow people to use some monies for private school, general public, if they choose to. And the governor said he declared a statewide emergency so he could block the bill. But guess what? His kids go to private school. The governor of California did something similar. While he insisted they closed the public schools with like a year and a half to two, his kids were in open face-to-face class in private school. So the elites actually kind of know what's going on, whether they admit it or not. But most of what I saw from students was that they were never taught key things about the American Revolution for independence. I didn't actually know this. I started reading up on something new to me. I mean, obviously George Washington pushed Thanksgiving for many reasons, including even after the war, because America had a lot of trouble with the Articles of Confederation and actually almost split up and squabbled anyway. So he had more than just the war for pushing Thanksgiving. But he did one thing. Whenever they got a victory on the battlefield, he had the soldiers gather and they had a Thanksgiving meal and they thanked God. And if you think about it for a minute, Britain was the world superpower, and maybe not like America, but at that particular time, 1775, they were the world superpower with the biggest navy. They dominated the sea, but still, they had the power, and he was able to get German mercenaries, and that's a long story. But so they had the power, and America was, not organized, no navy, no supply chain, and the Continental Congress was on and off. It was a big mess. So by any logical reason, we should have lost the war. And I know you've heard this story, but I want to tell it again for the people who will see this sermon for the first time via the tape program. They lost a big battle in New York, but by a grace of God, a fog allowed Washington's army to escape being crushed on Manhattan, and they had to leave New York, and they were losing battle to battle as they got pushed out of New Jersey further south till they crossed the river to kind of wait out the winter. And the British thought, well, we just about knocked them out. And most people thought it because they had the troops and the cannons and the supply chain, and Washington was begging for supplies, keep his army alive. And then on Christmas, George Washington, they had to do something. He crossed the Potomac early in the morning, ice. That iconic picture of Washington standing in the bow of one of these boats and with his cape flying. You've seen all the pictures of that, and people in the boats with him. And they secretly crossed the river and attacked the Hessians and the British because he knew they would be having a hangover because they got drunk on Christmas. Now the question was, why weren't Washington's troops drunk on Christmas? Because Christmas was illegal in the colonies in those years. I mean, that's a fact. You can look it up. Well, I asked students, how many of you knew that's why he did it? Would be one or two hands. They know the answer. It was illegal there. They were from private schools. Public school kids had nothing. And just to make the story complete, Washington showed his generalship was getting better. He then attacked the British, Trenton, and around a famous Yale, Harvard campus, Yale camps, get it. Anyway, and then the people in New Jersey and surrounding areas said, hey, we got a chance against the British. And 15,000 American militias, because all the Americans had rifles in those days, that just was common, and it really was on the frontier. They all joined him. He picked up 15,000 recruits, just like that, game was on. And he chased the British all the way back to New York, where they were safe with their big fleet. And, well, obviously the war was a long war back and forth. But don't you believe Washington won because he thanked God? I'm not trying to oversimplify all the military strategies and all that went on, but can't you see that's why he won? Because he thanked God. People can say all they want about Washington, this or that, but there's a lot of good things can be said about him. But I think God was with him. And most of those battles, he was on the battlefield on a big white horse with a big uniform on. He got several horses shot off from under him, several hats, but he never got killed. Remember when he was in the French and Indian War, that Indian chief, the same thing happened. And he said, I think he was lieutenant colonel, he said, the chief said, that guy's going to be a great leader for the English, because they were all considered English then, because we just can't seem to kill him. And the Indians had crack shots. They tried to get him. My point is, you would at least have to think God was with Washington, wouldn't you? And God wanted America to win. And just for the sake of knowing it, because people can say, well, America wouldn't have been so bad if Britain had controlled it. While that is true, Britain's foreign policy in the next century or two would have blocked many of the immigrants who came to America to make America great. And the British politics, America needed to be fettered and free to become the great superpower it became. So I think God, and we also believe in the theory of Ephraim and Manasseh having two separate prophetic roles. And for those who maybe haven't heard that before, just write our office. We have booklets on it about all of that. But I just want to make that point. And then, of course, during the Civil War, in 1863, Lincoln, well, the Civil War was a lot more iffy. People now look at it and say, well, it was a sure thing they're going to win it. No, it wasn't. I could say a whole lot about it, but I won't do it now because we'll be getting off the topic. But I believe Lincoln's speech on Thanksgiving, 1863, I think God heard it and answered it. And they won. And America was saved as one great country. Now I want to go back to 1621 when the Pilgrims first landed. And I would ask students about this. I said, I learned something I didn't know. Ken knew it on the podcast. He may have told me before the program, I'm not sure. But he said, did you know that their financial backers in Europe wanted them to work as a commune? Maybe they thought it'd be more profitable, and they wanted to use them as an experiment. Those poor little pilgrims going off into the deep forests of the New World. Well, after a year or so of that, they realized this commune socialist group, we're not working. It's not working. There's no incentive to be productive. So Bradford, the governor, said, forget that crazy policy. We're going, each family gets their own plot of land, their own set of the seeds and tools, and there were some payments back that they had to make back to Europe, but all of a sudden, once they went to pure capitalism, boom, it took off. They were very, very productive. And other Puritans poured across the ocean because they were so successful. Now, obviously, God blessed them. And I asked students, well, how many of you know that they tried socialism and it didn't work, and they went to capitalism and it did work? One or two hands went up. Guess what? Private schools. None of the public school students have ever heard of any such thing. They wouldn't dare teach that in public school. Now, there may be some public school teachers who disagree, and maybe my experiences don't include them all, but most of them don't. And here's something new. I saw this on a TV program last year. They made the Pilgrims villains. I'm not saying they took away their scratching out a foundation on a new continent, which was tough to do, and laying the foundation of the greatest nation in the world. which they should get credit for. Not only did they not give them credit, they said the Pilgrims were villains. They were genocide. By the way, the Massasoit Indians, plenty of them are still around, more than were back then in 1621. And they have their own Indian reservation, and many went into the general population. But that did not happen. It's twisted history. The Puritans, or Pilgrims, who were Puritans. By the way, Puritan meant they tried to obey the Bible as purely as possible. We might argue about a couple of their doctrines. Some of them believed in the Sabbath, but most didn't. But still, regardless of that, they were pretty biblical relative to the rest of the world. Now, I'm saying relative because no human group in this age is perfect. We all know that. So I'm saying relative to the rest of the world, clearly the American settlers were the most Bible-oriented people on the planet. I don't think you can argue that. Who else are you going to go to? Britain? And Britain was okay, but not like the Puritans. They were really, you read the Puritan manifestation and all the others, they were Bible-oriented. They may not have been right about everything, I'm not saying, but they were trying their best to be biblical. They made them out to be villains. But do you know that the peace between the Indians and the Pilgrims lasted for over half a century? And something I learned from the book 1491 that's interesting. And what he said in the book, and he proves it with a bunch of various layouts of all the big Indian associations. Internecine fighting among the Indians laid the groundwork for the Spanish to be so successful. I mean, that's, you read into details, you'll see what I mean. Cortez could never have conquered the Aztecs except, let's say, they had mistreated all the smaller tribes around them. There's even a movie about it. I don't recommend, the movie's kind of violent, but anyway, you see it, you'll see what I mean. So they used all the tribes around them to help them defeat them. The same thing on the other side in Peru. And well, it actually happened with the Pilgrims. Massasoit, the chief, had some scouts, and they saw this big ship in Plymouth Rock unloading it. He thought about attacking them all at once, but then he noticed they had guns and a few cannons. He also was under pressure from what's called the Iroquois League of Tribes to his west. They were trying to do them in, more internecine fighting, and their population had been declined because of diseases, which, since they happened before records, we don't really know why, but whatever the reasons were, his numbers were down. He said, these people, they can add to our population, give us more power, and they got guns. And I know their guns weren't that good then, but they were still guns. Guns, and by the way, the Indians, because some of the ships, there were fishing ships that fished right off the coast of New England, and they had occasionally stopped on the coast to get supplies and stuff. So the Indians had experienced the guns. There were a lot of English and Spanish ships that came off the coast. So they knew what guns could do. So the Wampanoag Confederacy of Tribes negotiated a treaty with the English settlers, and then in 1621 they had a celebration of the unity of those two groups who helped each other, and their cooperation is really the beginning of Thanksgiving. And the Indians, the English learned about local places to fish and hunt, and some things about helping corn grow in that soil. The Indians learned about, it was advanced in that. By the way, Britain had the most advanced agricultural technology in the world in 1620, which I was kind of shocked when I read about it. We think of, but they shared their European agricultural technology and tools with the Indians, which helped them. And as I said, they had guns. The Indians said, yeah, this is going to be good for us. It's going to keep the Iroquois off our back. And as I said, it worked for over half a century. So they got together and had a cooperative dinner celebrating their success. You know, and the Indians were good hunters too, and they brought in deers and, of course, turkeys. You all know about turkeys, and they had a great 3-day celebration. And the Pilgrims claimed they designed the first Thanksgiving after biblical celebrations in the Old Testament. Now, that's what they claimed. That was their motive behind it. Whatever they did, God heard their Thanksgiving prayer and blessed it, because, needless to say, they succeeded. I mean, there's no way you can say, oh, the Pilgrims failed. The colonies in America were disaster. No, they weren't. Actually, if you were to go back into the 1700s, once the colonies got going well, the people in the American colonies were some of the most prosperous people on the planet. When you think of the American Revolution, you think of poor peasants revolting against King George. Not so much. It was mostly middle class, often successful planters revolting against King George. And in that way, American Revolution was a little more sensible than some in Europe, which turned bloody, and you know the history of those bad revolutions in Europe. I want to read the scripture. This is Isaiah 59:14. Isaiah 59:14. Justice is turned back. Righteousness stands far off. Like, righteousness, I gotta have any of that. For truth is fallen in the streets. I love that expression. Truth is fallen in the street, like it's down. Equity or fairness cannot enter. I believe that we're in an age where truth about Thanksgiving, truth about the Pilgrims, truth about founding fathers, truth about America, truth about capitalism is fallen in the street. Higher education has been corrupted. And I guess many of us saw it in the classroom. We thought, this is crazy stuff. Some of the stuff they were teaching. It's fallen in the streets. And I would just say this. In a deceived world, if you try to oversimplify history, you corrupt it. And this CRT theory corrupts history because you put everybody in the oppressor or the oppressed category. You can't simplify world history something that stupid. It's like we're only good guys and bad guys. And if, say, the oppressed people do horrible, violent things to the others, well, they're justified because they're oppressed. No, nobody's justified for crimes against humanity and throwing babies in ovens and beheading babies. I could say more, but you get what I mean. But these theories actually promote such crazy behavior. It's unbelievable. And the Pilgrims weren't villains. It'd be like if I were a salesman. I would try to put it in a business setting. And I was a good, clever salesman. I walked up to some customers and I said to them, you got only 2 choices. Choice 1, you're smart, you see the future, and you know what you need, and you're going to buy this product the way I want it at the price I'm giving it to you. Or you can be stupid and backwards and fail to buy it, fall behind, and disaster. You got 2 choices. Which one are you going to take? Well, you realize in a real situation, a smart customer might say, wait a minute, maybe I can get a better price somewhere else. Maybe I don't need it now. Maybe I can wait 2 or 3 years and phase in. And you can miss a whole lot of if-and questions. Trying to make it a 2-choice solution is stupid, but that's what they do with history. And you're either a colonizer or a colony. By the way, America was a colony, but they lump our government and our history in the category of the colonizers, which I guess I see their logic, but it's wrong logic. And the one thing that's different, you probably know this, but the Pilgrims came to America as families. They brought their wives and children. When the Spanish came to conquer the New World, they only sent soldiers. They were all young men, or fairly young men. They were all soldiers. They didn't send any women for a long, long, long time. Now they made it with the women of the New World. That they got. Once you win, you get to have the women. So I'm not saying they. But my point is, the Spanish came as conquerors, and they admitted they were after gold. Now, some of them did also add in there. They wanted to move the Indians from, let's say, the worst of paganism to Catholicism. but they were mostly after gold. You read about, well, I won't mention all their names, Pizarro, but you know the kind of thing like Pizarro held people captive and said, get me more and more gold. Anyway, it's a gruesome story, but they came as conquerors. The Pilgrims did not come as conquerors. They came to build a new world. And by the way, America was the first country to give religious freedom. Now, we probably don't think of that as a big deal, but in 1620 and the years thereafter, that was a big deal. In Europe, they fought over religion, and I could tell you in other countries, if I mention other religions, I'm not putting them down. You're putting down Hindus and others, but you'll find in other parts of the world, people put down the religions, and it was a big part of war and fighting and dominating people. So having religious freedom was a big deal. And also, I think they've twisted history in one way. They changed it after World War II. You know, when Jefferson said there should be a wall of separation between church and state, and he was writing to the Danbury Baptist Church, which had some complaints against the government. And what he meant was, and it's clear in the letter, he meant that the state should not be monkeying with churches. They shouldn't tax churches. They shouldn't mess with what they can and cannot preach. They're evangelists. They should leave them alone. But after World War II, the legal profession flipped it. Now, you're going to say, well, what about churches influencing the state? There was no problem with the morality of churches trying to influence the morality of the country. Do you know that Jefferson used the Bible as a textbook when he was as president? Because, you know, Washington, D.C. is run by the federal government. I bet they say, well, Jefferson. Now, Jefferson was not a good churchgoer. Both he and Lincoln, they believed in the Bible, quoted the Bible, believed in morality, but they never found a church they felt comfortable in. In Lincoln's case, it may also have been, he was a little socially awkward at first, and that may have been part of his problem in churches as well. They say he didn't dress well enough when he was young. But regardless, those men believed in the Bible, even if you can look at Jefferson and say, well, he was never a loyal member of the Episcopalian or the Baptist Church. He fought for religious freedom. That's the point I want to make. And they came as families, not like the Spanish as conquerors. And they believed in freedom of worship. Now, speaking of families, I want to tell a corny joke. It's called Try and Guess Mom. And I'll admit I stole this joke from a particular newspaper, but they don't care. A young man excitedly comes home. Mom, I picked out the woman I marry. I'm going to marry this woman. And but just for fun, Mom, I'm going to invite 3 young ladies over and see if you can, talk to them and get to know which one I'm going to marry. Well, he invites 3 young ladies over, all about the same age, and the mom, they're all sitting on the couch, and she's talking with them. And he goes in the back room later and says, okay, Mom, which one of those women do you think I picked? And his mom said immediately, the one in the middle. He said, wow, that's amazing. How did you know that? Because I don't like her. Because I don't like her. And that, that reminded me of something. A particular mother I know told a particular son, don't marry this woman. And somebody else said, get to know her better. And she was rushing him to the altar. Years later, he admitted, you were right, Mom. I didn't see the real her until a few months after the wedding. But at any rate, by the way, do you know in the old days, parents guided children on who to date, who not to date? Well, we might say they may sometimes been a little restrictive, but who knows you better than your mom and dad? And aren't women better at reading other women than men are? I know you can debate that a little bit, but parents are important. That's the point of that joke, that parents are important. And one more miracle happened the year or so before that first Thanksgiving. I want to put it in context. As the Pilgrims were struggling and had just landed, walking into their encampment came Squanto, because his tribe had that same spot before they all died off of some mysterious disease. He walks into there speaking the King James English. And as far as we know, and we think this is true, he was the only man on the planet who could speak both the Wampanoag Native American language and the English language well. He could speak them both well. And his story is at least in some ways a great story. He was picked up by a Spanish fishing boat. They tricked him and sold him into slavery in Spain. And somehow he got to England. And somewhere in England, some Christians got him out of slavery. He got converted to Christianity. And his time in London, I forgot how many years he spent, he learned the English language very well. And he made a deal with an English boat to bring him back to the New World. They were just going to fish off the coast. They dropped him off, and he walked into his village, and there were the Pilgrims. And all of a sudden, they had a translator who knew both languages very, very well. Probably the only guy on the planet. Can you see that's only a miracle? Think about it. That allowed them to negotiate with the Indians, intricately, that they could not have done. There's another Indian who knew a little broken English, but not that well. But he knew it well, and he believed in Christ. You talk about a miracle. Squanto is a miracle. God blessed them with what they needed, a translator. And I just think it's a great thing. And I hate the oversimplification of history into good guys, bad guys. That's almost childlike history. It's unacademic. The world is much too complex. We ran through a little bit this last night, and you might have heard it last night, but I said, look at it. You can't put the world in that simplistic terms. Like Genghis Khan had the biggest land empire in the world I call it the Dark Ages, the latter part, from Korea to deep into Europe. He conquered, and you can read about how mean the Mongolian Empire was, or Attila the Hun. Actually, the Romans were, quote, the civilized colonizers who took over parts of Europe and Germany. But these barbarians from the outside, Attila the Hun, when Rome was weak enough because of degeneracy from within, they conquered Rome and did all kinds of terrible things. Well, wait a minute. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? You see, it's not that simplistic. And then you take about the Muslim world. They conquered the Arabian Peninsula, and then they, through violence, spread throughout the Middle East. And for a while, they conquered a big chunk of Spain, were moving into France until Charles Martel, the Hammer, what a great name. He defeated them in France. And then, by the way, the big news in 1492 wasn't Columbus sailing the ocean blue, as the Spanish finally fully defeated the Islamic Empire and drove them out of Spain. That was the big. Christopher Columbus was a sideshow. They didn't even think it was worth it. Oh, we give you some money, go out with 3 ships. We hope you come back alive, maybe. But that was the big news. And there was also a defeat of them in the eastern part of Europe, outside Vienna, not Vienna, the real Vienna in Europe. Okay, well, who's the colonizer and who's the colony? You see, it's confusing. And we could say the same things about some things with the Chaka Khan and Africa. But my point is, you can't simplify history. The good guys are bad guys. And even the American Indian Wars. Do you know that every American Indian War, there was always some tribes on the United States side and some not. America got a lot of breaks as well. You can see God's, if you look at American history from an overview, you can clearly see God's blessing. I mean, it's easy. From 13 little colonies on the east side of the Appalachians, within 100 years of Washington's presidency, it had become a world superpower with the world's #1 economy. The world just didn't fully realize it until World War I, I think. Then it became more obvious. I think the British kind of knew it before then, but the point is, That's speedy growth, unbelievable growth, unbelievable blessings. And I think God blessed America in part because of Thanksgiving. See, why don't we think one of the laws of Thanksgiving is that if you thank God for the blessings you have, you'll have to get more blessings. And if you don't appreciate the God's blessings and you don't thank God, you're likely to go into more degeneracy. I want to read a few scriptures to kind of add to that point. Psalm 67, 3-6. Psalm 67, 3-6. Let the people praise you, O God. Let all the people thank you. Let people give thanks to you, O God. Let all the people praise you. The earth shall yield its increase, and God, our own God, shall bless us. Has America been blessed? I would argue this. If you go to Europe and other parts of the world, here's what you'll notice. Americans have bigger apartments, bigger yards, bigger houses, bigger cars. Our grocery cart that we have in Walmart is twice the size. I remember we went shopping in London. It's twice the size of their little carts. And their grocery stores are smaller. Their roads are smaller. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. And even the poorest people in America are often at middle class level by living standards compared to people in many parts of the world. Most people don't even know that. Our food is, even with our current problems, is still relatively cheap compared to many places in the world. Many places they have to spend over half their income to eat. And it may get that way here someday, but I hope not. But right, and by the way, America's agricultural problem, most of American history, was not enough food like many countries. It was too much. You look at some of those pictures from the 1800s and even later, and they'll show these places where the farmers brought their corn. They had corn, the bins were full, and they had corn stacked up like a mountain. They had too much of them. The farmers said, this is going to ruin the prices. They're too much. And then the ag department came in and bought it up. I guess we call it price controls. And that, by the way, we still have that. And that's so the farmers can make a profit because they make so much stuff. Of course, now we sell a lot of it all over the world. But think about that. Your greatest agricultural problem is too much. That's hard. I know that's hard to believe, but that's actually true. 1 Timothy 3:1. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful. I emphasize that word, unthankful, without self-control, brutal. If the world moves that way, it's becoming less and less godly. And that's the trend. And it's starting to happen. I don't know how bad it is yet, but it's starting to happen. And the other law is that if you become ungrateful, you start to open the door to decadence. Romans 1:21. They were not grateful. And so Paul writes, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And you read the rest of that, they went into degeneracy. You read the rest of Romans. At least in part, they went into degeneracy because they were not thankful. So what can we do? That's kind of my last little section. What can we do? Well, in Deuteronomy 6:7, it says, you shall teach these principles diligently to your children, and shall talk with them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Same thing in Deuteronomy 11:19. So what can we do? God was concerned about the next generation. We should also be concerned about the next generation. And I know you're all saying, oh, it's too late now. The kids are already screwed up. I still want to just add this. It may be true, but whatever influence we can be, try to influence people to be thankful, to appreciate American heritage, to appreciate what our forefathers did, in a world that's flawed. So I'm not saying it's a perfect world, never has been. It won't be until Christ gets back. But still, you don't want kids to hate their own country. Well, that's what CRT does indirectly. And maybe to hate other races or and a lot of other bad things, or hate their heritage. America really has a heritage of great success. America has been the most generous nation, charity-wise, in world history. Sent out the most missionaries around the world, far and away. I mean, no country's even close. And even when bad things happen now, the U.S. is usually leading the way in charitable help and foreign aid. So looking at our forefathers as villains, I was just thinking a little about my dad and Natalie's dad. And I didn't really appreciate that when my dad was telling me this, but when he was in the Pacific Ocean, he was on the gun crew of one of those battleships that had these big 18-inch guns that bombarded those beaches so to soften them up for the Marines landing. So, and her dad was also on a battleship. My only point is, there are some heroic things in our background. And I talked about my grandfather before, what a great guy he was. The point I want to make is there are a lot of good people, and America's been a land of opportunity. I mentioned this last night because most don't know it. Frederick Douglass was born a slave but died a millionaire. And that was only true because America was a land of great opportunity. Now, granted, he was talented and gifted, and the average person's not going to be able to do that, but he had the opportunity. That's the point I'm making. And in most parts of the world, because caste systems, and they have other words for it, but in Europe and in Asia and Africa, people are held back. And I've said this before, people from India, very talented. In India, they're held back, they say, by government corruption, the caste system, etc. They come to America, boom! Within one generation, they're big successes. Because America has opportunity, freedom, capitalism. Now, I worry about we're slowly losing some of that, but I hope we can hold on to it a little bit longer. But one thing, America's been a blessed nation. And many of us could say, if we're really honest, sure, when we were growing up, maybe we didn't have everything we wanted or needed. But overall, we've been blessed. Most people, if they're really honest, you know why all these people are storming into America? Because even with the problems we got now, they still see America as the freest, most prosperous place on the planet. And you live here. And they say, people say this, that foreigners that have been repatriated become Americans that really appreciate America, where a lot of our kids don't appreciate America. They don't love America. America's bad. And this one little college student said at one rally, he had a little poster, America has never been great. Well, that's what education has brainwashed him. So what we can do is try to teach our kids the truth. Try to tell them traditional values are not bad. We need to guide our kids from making huge mistakes. It's an uphill battle. We should try to influence the next 2 generations to whatever extent we can, correct whatever misinformation we can, teach kids to be proud of their forefathers, remind them that they're blessed to be in America. And we should try to help people be happy this Thanksgiving and really focus on thanking God.